Hello, welcome to part 2 of how to get the information that you want to get. We're talking about good ways and bad ways to ask questions. So if I go back to the previous slide of this PowerPoint, we had the last lecture ended on comparing closed versus open questions. So obviously closed questions would be the not advised way to ask questions. And open-ended questions are the positive, good questions. So continuing on the line of questions not to ask, the next type of question you want to try to avoid are asking leading questions. And so why are leading questions bad? And maybe actually what exactly, there we go. What exactly are the leading questions? So it's asking a question, it's usually a closed-ended question, and so that right off the bat starts off in a negative tone where the person who's asking the question, so typically the social worker, first establishes that they know something or a premise, and then asks the closed-ended question formatted at the end, so the respondent has very little alternative except to agree or disagree. So if, let's say, you're talking to a child who you're supervising their parenting time, and you ask them, you don't like going to your dad's, right? Well, so why it's a leading question is it's the first part is you're making a statement that you have some knowledge. So you're assuming you have the knowledge that the child does not like going to their dad's, and then adding on that and closed-end question of right at the end really kind of prompts the individual, or in this case a child, to agree or disagree, and the way you phrase it is leaning towards them agreeing with you whether they do or not. So other ways why leading questions are bad is it assumes that the practitioners know what is happening with a client, and that sometimes prompts some of the leading questions. So it could be done in a very well-intended way that you're just trying to summarize what they're saying, or trying to reflect back. And so like if they've been talking about, the child was talking about frustrations about their dad's house, they don't like that he has 10 big stinky dogs, so they might innocently ask, so you don't like going to your dad's then, right? Still kind of leading and making an assumption. You would be better to ask a question more in the lines of, tell me how you feel about going to your dad's house. Because that leaves room for them to say, I don't like, or to explore like, I like it, I just don't like the dogs. Another issue with leading questions are sometimes the practitioner or the social worker imposes their mental image of what is happening when setting up the question. So let's say the social worker really hates dogs, and so the thought of having 10 stinky dogs up in their business sounds miserable, and so they're kind of creating this picture of nasty dogs and assuming that it's a horrible situation versus letting the client identify if it's horrible or not. Another issue is there's no option to generate information, so clients feel that all they can do is confirm the assumption in question, so it's not really inviting them into the conversation. It's more making a statement based on what you think and having them to make a choice to agree or disagree. And such questions limit the client's ability to disclose their own information. So similar to that last point, you're not engaging the client in a dialogue that's very client-focused. So there's different types of leading questions. So one leading question that includes the answer, that's one type, would be, no one would steal unless he knew why, would he? Okay, maybe there is an explanation outside of that, but the therapist is stating that, no, this is what's happening. Or if someone would say, I like that third one, that teacher would never do that to you, right? Okay, maybe not, but it's not your place in the line of questioning to make that statement and putting in your client in a uncomfortable position to either agree or disagree with you. The question, and then another type is questions that do not require an answer, but which the interview asks that you will agree with him or her. So I think these examples kind of demonstrate that well. So if someone was talking to a child, again, in the situation, you didn't mean to do this, did you? It was because you're upset and tired that you hit him the way you did, wasn't it? So person who's asking the question is creating the whole entire narrative and not allowing the client space to be able to answer in a way that matches their reality, or for them to provide information. So now another option would be, you didn't mean what you said about your father, did you? He really does love you, and you know it very well, don't you? So there you go. Again, writing the narrative for the client versus letting them write it themselves. And I think leading questions can be particularly problematic when working with children, because children often in their developmental stages and just natural inclinations is to people please, and they don't want to get in trouble. And so if you are stating a leading question and prompting them to answer or agree with you, even if they don't or not, more than likely they will agree because they don't want to get in trouble or they don't want to upset you. These questions really emphasize a power dynamic between the questioner and the person. So not even in like therapeutic relationships, if like in conversations with like a significant other, there might be some abuse or narcissism. These questions are very dangerous because it does create that power hierarchy in some sense of control. So not everyone who asks questions like this has that intent. However, it can be used and can create a lot of harm. Another type of don't ask questions are double questions. So what are double questions? Do you know what they are? That's an example right there. Up there, I was being really funny when I was writing these. So a double question is adding two questions into one statement. So an either or is one type. So if you would say, well, do you like pina coladas or getting caught in the rain? Okay, well, what if I like both of them? So putting a double question is problematic because it only allows the person you're talking to choose one thing, but they might prefer both or neither, or there might be a third option that isn't even considered. So if you want to find out how they specifically feel about two different things, instead of creating an or question or loading it into one specific question, you could rephrase it. And the way to rephrase that would be, all we can offer you at the moment is either pina coladas or getting caught in the rain. I'm wondering if one of these appeals to you or appeals to you. So then giving them the choice to say, yes, I would like one of them. But also adding on, if not, we can think further, acknowledges there might be a third choice or they might not like them either. So if you're trying to get a comparison about like what do you prefer, phrasing it in a way that's not quite as pointed, like, well, do you like this or that? Sometimes it might be appropriate and there might be an opportunity for that. But just identifying, asking questions in that manner does not necessarily, again, invite the client to share exactly how they're feeling. You're limiting them or putting them in a position where they feel like they have to make a choice. There's also a thing called confusing double questions. So this type of double question asks the client one thing, but then adds on another question that has nothing to do with the first. And so for people who might have a lot of thoughts swirling in their head at one time, or you might be thinking of a million things and trying to figure out how to prioritize which question, you might inadvertently ask one thing and then throw in another thing as well during that question. It's part of that practicing that we do to kind of get a little bit better than that. But the reason this is problematic is the client might not know what to answer because both things are very, very random. So, for example, if you're talking, let's say you're doing counseling at a college, and you want to know, let's say your intent is to figure out about students' time management. And so you're trying to figure out if they're able to balance classes and playing their intramural games. You might ask, well, how are your classes going this semester? And did you make it to your intramural game? Did you win? Okay, there's a lot going on. The did you win is slightly tangential because it doesn't really target their time management. But asking the question about how your class is going and did you make it to your intramural game might logically make sense to you because you're trying to figure out their time management. But it doesn't, it's very confusing to the client because A, they don't know what to answer and they might not be tracking with your train of thought as well. So a good way to paraphrase that type of question to still get the content and information you want would be first to ask the first part, so how are your classes going? Wait for your client's response. And how are you able to balance playing intramurals around your class schedule? So you're asking the same exact thing, but you're doing it in a way where the client is involved in the narrative. And then another one, we're just rapid firing through these. Bombarding questions. I also call these loaded questions. I was going to change this slide to say loaded, but I also like bombarding because it kind of gives a very, to me, a visual description of how this questioning feels. So do you know what these are? Do you need more time to think about it? Do you want me to tell you about them? Why aren't you saying anything? So that little phrasing up there, again, is me trying to be funny. But really, that's exactly what bombarding and loading questions are. They don't allow the client to have enough time to answer the previous question, and this can feel overwhelming to the client. And sometimes, often, social workers fall into the trap of asking the bombarded and loading questions because they're uncomfortable with the silence, or they're unsure about what to ask, or it's like a manifestation of their anxiety, and so it's more of in the client's head than anything else. We're recording in my bathroom. Ivy, Mama's recording. Come sit with me, okay? Say hi, everybody. So, this is the one that when I talk about that one music video country singer, when he like asks us a million questions, this is an example of that, like not giving the object of his affection time to answer the questions. And I actually have linked that music video and an activity later after you watch this video as a fun way to kind of practice rephrasing questions. So let's say you are talking with a client and you ask them a question. They don't respond right away, so then you start asking more and more. Instead of doing that to fill the silence or to mask your discomfort, you can ask them, do you need some more time to think? Anything else you can think of to say, would you like me to stop asking questions for a moment? So kind of pausing the train of thought. It allows the social worker to kind of internally gather their thoughts, but it also puts it takes away asking some of those maybe intrusive questions or what feels like intrusive questions, and kind of allows for a check-in for the client to kind of recenter on the conversation. And so if you're going to ask some of the questions when clients aren't responding, or you feel like you're overloading, you want to ask those in a gentle tone. So if you look at that first example, it's a sad face. Yes, good job. It says, well, why don't you answer? Well, if you say it like that, they're probably not going to respond to you positively. So asking in a gentle way, like, hey, well, can you help me understand why you're not comfortable answering or something? It's all about that presentation and tone as well. And what, is that happy? Yeah. Do you want Mommy to do the happy ones or make another video with the happies? Yeah. Make a video with happies? Okay, we're going to stop there because I'm not going to be able to get through all of the happy questions in my limited screening or video recording. So just to recap back through all of this, questions not to ask are the why questions because they can feel judgmental. The closed questions because they don't really invite a conversation in, and it then can kind of lead to some of that tendency to do rapid fire bombarding questions because the client's not really engaging, so then you feel that urge to ask. So closed questions are ones that usually have a one-word response or a very narrow in focus. We did throw in one question to ask because it made more sense to compare closed and open-ended ones. So questions to ask are the open-ended questions because it keeps the clients in the driver's seat and it invites more of a narrative versus a one-word answer. There's the things. So avoid leading questions where you are, you spilled my pop. I'm so happy that you did that. So if you're asking leading questions, you're often making assumption or leading the client into agreeing with you. Can be rather manipulative, whether you intend it to be or not. And it puts you kind of in a power dynamic versus the client directing what they're feeling. Types of those are ones that include the answers or ones that the client doesn't necessarily have to respond to, but where the social worker makes some sort of assumption about what the client should or might be thinking. Double questions are where you ask multiple things at one time, and it doesn't really give self-determination for the client because they might not like any of them. And then finally, the leading or the loaded and bombarding questions where you're asking things on top of each other without giving the client an opportunity to speak. there you have it.